and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Good evening. Welcome to Soul, with best-selling Texas author and sacred site traveler, Teal Gray. Coming to you on WBHM-DB Radio. Teal, what's on for tonight?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Soul. I'm your host, Teal Gray. We're coming to you live on WBHM-DB Radio out of Birmingham, Alabama. Now, tonight, you guys were not through with Daniel Allen Jones, and neither were we. He is such an interesting person, and I'm thrilled to have him back tonight. And also, I asked Tui Snider to join us again as a co-host since she was on that first show. So tonight, you have all three of us here. Welcome to the show, Tui and Daniel.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tui, good to be back with you both.
Exciting to be back.
Daniel, you know, when you're as interesting as you, it's one show's just never going to be enough. And I don't even think this second show's enough, but we're going to go with it. You know, I want to get right into it because you're so interesting, and there's just a lot of topics that we can go through with you. But I wanted to go to what is some of my favorites and ask you about, first off, your research and your work with UFOs, and, you know, what started your interest in this? Did you have an encounter, or was it just a curiosity?
Well, yeah, I think that as we continue on to this second segment, I think that just touching back upon where we left from last time, talking about some of the different concepts that are portrayed in my upcoming book, Mythos, and this really does show sort of an expose of my own journey into exploring these areas and different subjects, but particularly how this area itself, the study of UFOs and things that really fall within that area, I think have always interested me, even as a child, going through and knowing about shows and movies where it was more imaginary or just part of the drama of the show, to the question of what if there really are things out there like this which we may not really understand, but nevertheless are part of our world, or maybe from something beyond. I think has always kind of intrigued my curiosity in a way that it's been a seed, but not until later on, like my teenage years, I really got far more interested into the deeper science behind a lot of these things and what's really going on in terms of what can be reported or substantiated through science and things like that. So I eventually got involved with a group that investigated UFOs and other types of mysterious phenomena. And that was something that allowed me to connect with a lot of other like-minded individuals. But I was really interested probably about 11 to 12 years ago, and researching different cases that were, at least that I knew a little bit about, that were either nearby or within range that I could go and tangibly at least visit a site or something. And so I found that there's a number of different things right around here in our area and all over the state of Texas, actually, that I would come to know about later on. But this is what led me to kind of get out and connect with the local community of people that may have an interest in this area or just have a basic knowledge of resources and information about this subject of
give you some firsthand information, and that's always the best.
Yeah, and so I think that through connecting with certain people, that allowed me to gain different perspectives about the phenomenon, and then looking at specific cases around the area, and then also historical cases as well. Like Roswell has always been something people know or hear about, but there's actually a great deal of information that most people probably have no idea regarding just like that case in general. But there are a lot of things in Texas and other places that have significance to the subject of ufology, and as much that even Roswell, you have the debris from allegedly the crash, taken to Fort Worth and taken pictures of, where people see that, the guy holding up the material that's from Fort Worth. So there's a lot of really interesting connections and sort of synchronicities, I think, when exploring this subject. At least I found for myself personally getting involved, but it wasn't something that I had out of I would say, a personal encounter or sighting that would, I would say, be like significant enough to me to basically get involved with this in that kind of way. I think that I had a general interest and found that this was something that intrigued me, and I felt sort of a connection to in some way, that it was something I was drawn to. But I feel that it's important to investigate these areas that are mysterious to what we understand and what's scientifically conventionally accepted, and help us to grow in that way as well. So that was something that happened a little bit early on.
There's so much always unfolding within this realm and this field, and as science and our, intelligence, our levels, keep going up, it opens up more and more and more every year. So now has to be maybe one of the most intriguing times for it these recent years, and even now, for discoveries and stories coming out once people felt possible to tell their story without danger of losing their job or danger to their family, because there's all those stories of the people coming to dole out threats throughout the years.
Yeah, I think that I've been fortunate enough throughout the last several years to connect with people who have either had some sort of encounter or sighting, and then they give their testimony. I might even interview people, but that's something I found which is really important in all this, is that you have those who come forward who don't mind sharing, because there is a big ridicule factor in all of this, and it can affect people's personal and work life and a lot of things. So it's understandable why some wouldn't care to really speak on something which otherwise is really hard to understand or challenging for them in some way anyways. So it's interesting to see the variety of people that come out with different claims. I've heard a lot of stories, and I'm open-minded. I like to think I'll entertain anything, but I realize that there are things you have to be reasonable about, and I do what I can to stay level-headed with a lot of it, and in a way that I don't necessarily dismiss a lot of claims simply because of one thing that might stand out, but just to have a critical way of thinking about what's possible, and then also what the facts are and what we can ascertain from information or evidence or whatever things we can do to substantiate certain instances or cases of unknown phenomena. In this case, there's a lot of activity which people just have their testimony for, and that's all we really have to go with. So there's this idea that you pretty much have to go with someone's word on what they say, and it's hard to really substantiate or validate some claims just based off of a lack of information. And it's important to see whatever things can corroborate those stories might give it more credence. And I think that in many ways, some of the most profound cases have several compounding issues which can all be examined and utilized in a way that might help just to show us that there's a lot going on that we don't understand about genuine unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs, or UAP is one of the new terms really being used as. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to it, and what we can learn from people coming forward is really valuable. And so interviewing people who have had not just sightings, but like encounters or abduction experiences, that's really an important part to understanding this phenomenon, I think, as well. And maybe some of these things aren't necessarily directly connected, but I think it's important to examine the relation of certain events to others that fall kind of in this category.
Yeah, and you're correct. I agree with you. I have to tell on myself a bit. I didn't think that, I've had through my lifetime, 3 different situations happen. One, there was a group of people here at my house. I have the 2 houses on the 3 acres. And there was a situation where there were several professors here. There was somebody that worked high up in government. There was, 9 people here for when I first moved in. This has been, 23 years ago, but I didn't think it was that important at the time. We all saw it, like I said, for 20 minutes, these lights were back in the, in the field, and they were obviously, we deduced what they weren't. And it was something that was very unusual in the way they moved and the way they broke apart and the way, they, just the movement was really the thing. And, I'm afraid I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but Noe Torres,
Yeah, no.
Had told me to come forward. He's like, "Oh, Teal, gosh, you've got to contact, the MUFON and report that," because he's like, while you think, oh, that was ages ago and I didn't even think to do it, he's like, there may be other people that saw that, and to have people, and everybody was fine about coming forward, and he's like, you never know, that could help everybody collaborate, that something was there or something was seen. And I feel really bad about that, because I just thought, oh, well, we saw something we couldn't explain, and there was a whole group of us, but I didn't really think about back in the day about how that could be helpful to proving things. And so now I'm really conscious of that. And I think it's wonderful too, how many people in the military, policemen, pilots, even astronauts, have been telling more and more in-depth stories and instances. And I think that also helps give a little bit of credence to other people who, and a little bit of like, oh, courage, step forward, because it's people in all walks of life that have these interactions. And the more that people take the stigma out of it and just look at it as something science-based even, or it's just a curiosity that we can't explain, I think who knows what we'll find out.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that experience. I think it's really interesting, just because there are many others very similar to that, with accounts of light, just seeing not necessarily any particular form other than strange, ambiguous, amorphous lights that can move and go in different directions and maybe very sporadic. Since all of this, I have had a few interesting sightings of things. I wouldn't say anything incredibly significant in the scope of what some people have apparently witnessed, but things that allow me to kind of attempt to be reasonable in attempting to deduct something that might help us understand, maybe not every UFO, because everything that we see is different. It's not all the same thing, of course, and some people might see shapes that seem the same. There's what people think as these discs or triangular shaped objects, and many different things, or just orbs or balls of light, just energy or some kind of light. And I think that it's not all just the same thing that people are experiencing. And that's really important to note for people who don't understand or aren't really too familiar with any of this, is that people experiencing encounters or sightings like this might just see a form of light, and not necessarily a particular shape or something, but just a form of energy or light that seems to be maneuvering in some capacity that doesn't seem to maybe be something we could do or mimic with conventional technology. And I think that really should show us that there could be really something a lot more to what's going on behind what we encounter or witness, because we can only see some degree of maybe what took place. And I think that there's a really important distinction between people's experiencing of what would seem to be physical craft objects, like some kind of plane or vehicle, rather than a form of energy or maybe intelligence itself. And we were looking at kind of getting into this as well, and I think that it's something we have to consider, that maybe some of these types of encounters with various phenomena might not all be vehicular in their origin. They might be some kind of form of intelligence or energy or consciousness or an entity that we experience as some kind of strange light or shape or some kind of experience to us that may be different for a lot of people, depending on their own perception of what they experience. And the strange thing about that is that people standing together looking at the same thing might actually experience it differently depending on what they're encountering, and how it can affect them and their current situation of or lens of perception and how they interpret the events that are unfolding before them. To do with what we were discussing with the concept of what I am working on with mythos is that everyone has their own sort of lens through which they perceive their world based upon all of these windows that we look through, whether it might be religion or political ideology, some kind of orientation that is a compass through which they attempt to guide their life and live it. And so everyone that has whatever beliefs or different forms of understanding or constructs that they've built up socially or personally, that all will affect their ability to perceive any information in nature. But if something totally anomalous happens, that's one of the things that a lot of people may not realize, is that aside from the sort of nuts and bolts aspect, there's a great deal of information that could indicate that there's a transphysical or metaphysical aspect to this phenomena that we don't necessarily have a good grasp of, that seems to play upon our own psychological social apparatus. And some people might say that throughout the ages of humanity, that people would see or experience certain things that were relative to their time frame or cultural relevance. So I think it's really important to see that maybe that's something that's still an ongoing thing, and we just perceive things differently in our current state of mind. And that itself is one of the concepts of mythos, is that we all exist within this mythical operating system that we interpret not just collectively but independently, and all of the experiences that we have are being experienced through the senses, not just of physical things, but also of something beyond that, of frequency and of vibration and of electromagnetism. And a lot of those things we don't really understand very well as a culture. We have a lot of great scientific work, and I think that there's tons of progress that's been made, and that's really important. But as a general culture, it's important to think about how we can continue to develop these areas in a way that helps us understand more about our own reality and our world in general. So, yeah, I think that's a really important idea.
It is. I love the way that you weave that together. I think that's going to be fascinating. I cannot wait for your book. It's going to be so interesting to read that. And it's a wonderful thing to open people's minds. And I think that's exactly what you're doing by even having us examine just what you said. How do we all look at things? Where is that coming from? Where our points of view can vary. So, but yet if we're more similar than different. So as we can keep working with, like you, as you keep working with everybody and bringing it all together, the thought pattern can then can move forward and we can get somewhere with everything else. I'm excited about that. What do you think, Daniel, about, I hear more and more recently, than I have in a long time, about unidentified flying objects surrounding particularly Alaska, but all the different oceans. Are you hearing a lot of buzz about that, or is it just something that's always been a common thread about the UFOs emerging from the depths of the oceans?
Well, that's a good question, because a lot of reports actually do indicate that there's a sort of aquatic notion behind the ability for these objects to traverse through the sky and the water. So you have what are called USOs, or unidentified submersible objects, that have been seen by the military, the Navy, lots of different groups and government agencies have information about this as well. It's important to note that, the Pentagon has come forward that they have had at least one investigation program into what they call unidentified aerial phenomena. And a lot of these cases don't just show aerial phenomena, but something that may be under the water as well, or be able to go from one to the other. And there's plenty of cases, but one of them that is probably more well known now is the release of the Pentagon's files that sort of broke the news about that story with their group ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And this is something that, a lot of people still don't really know a whole lot about, but there seems to be probably at least a few different variations of a group or groups like this that are still functioning or have for a long time. This is just one that happened to be declassified. Anyway, there's one of the things that people have known more recently about through the release of this information is an event from 2004 off the coast of California with a group of the Navy with this airship, or this a Nimitz battle group, basically several different naval vessels. And this is something that has gotten a lot of notoriety now. And let me actually pull this up for you guys.
Yeah,
so the Nimitz encounter is what people are referring to as a Tic Tac.
Let me stop you right there, Daniel. Let's put a pin in it. We're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. And then when we come back, I want to pick that up because that's like one of my I'm so interested in that recently. So we'll be right back, everybody. Stay with us and enjoy the show.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama. Since 1948, Fate Magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
This is Jason Bland, host of Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup, where we stream live as a webcast every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, with guests who will blow your mind. Live ghost box sessions where you can call into the show to see if the spirits will talk to you, and the World Wide Web of Weird with the latest in paranormal news and evidence. We're bringing the weird every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to WBHM-DB Radio. This is Teal Gray. I'm your host of Soul to Soul. Tonight we have been hearing from Daniel Jones. And Daniel, before we went to break, we were talking about the phenomenon of UFOs that have been seen, emerging from, various waters and oceans. And I was asking you about that, and you were going to finish your thought on that.
Well, there was an interesting encounter off the coast of California that the Navy heard of, and this was something that we heard of more recently in 2017 when the Pentagon announced that they had a UFO investigation program. And this particular case was witnessed by people and the crew of the battle group Nimitz, which is an aircraft carrier, and then a smaller vessel called the USS Princeton, which the senior radar analyst there was Kevin Day, and he got an indication on his radar presentation that showed that there was an unknown target. And so they seemed to think maybe this could be an error, maybe a glitch. So they shut the system down, turned it back on, which isn't really just like a flip of the switch. This takes a while, but they ended up seeing these unknown correlated targets in a way that it didn't seem to be a glitch, and there was actually going on. And so that's when he decided to make the call to send up the F-18 Hornets up there to actually engage with these, and not necessarily fire upon them, but to just lay some eyes on them, see what's going on. And that was when Commander David Fravor actually had visual contact with what they were describing as the Tic Tac UFO, which is what you could describe as maybe a large Tic Tac shaped cylindrical smooth object about the size of an 18-wheeler. And this was recorded on data tapes, which were later confiscated by the Air Force. And it's something that, I use to point out that not only do a lot of people have a greater knowledge of this event many years later because of this announcement, but this shows that there has always, in some way, with groups out seeing things in the ocean, been an interesting involvement with objects of unknown origin with the ocean and going, from the water to the sky. And I think that plays a big part. There had something to do with that in this case that people speculate could mean that the objects, were also in the water. Some people find that highly disputable, but I think it's interesting to see how something like this can give people the awareness that not only is there a phenomenon, but it could be that different types of what people are experiencing are able to have different ways to perform. And it, again, may not necessarily be that they're all vehicular. And that's one of the strange concepts that we're starting to understand more and more, is that maybe some of the things that are being experienced aren't necessarily material in origin, in the sense of it being a plane or, again, a vehicle, an advanced vehicle or ship of some kind. But I think it's important to note that it's going to be different case by case. It's not always necessarily the same. And that's what we have to see, is how this plays a role in the reports that we get and other information that correlates with those reports. Yeah.
Well, and you get into the different dimensions and quantum physics of things that, that could integrate and all be so many different layers and so many different things. And, I don't want to get too far off a track of this, but because I know Tui has a question for you that she's ready to ask. But, you even get that people ask me about, angels and Bigfoot and UFOs and all these different things. And it's a big question. There's a lot of different possibilities, a lot of different things it could be, a lot of different ways it could be. And so, it really does leave a kind of an excitement in the air, if you're like me, who's always a curious cat, just to see what's going to happen. But Tui, I know you wanted to ask a question of Daniel, so let me turn it over to you for a moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of turn the lens, just shine the spotlight directly at Daniel and ask if you've had any personal experience, anomalous experience that you could share with us, big or small. It could be a lucid dream or a Ouija board or ghost sighting or synchronicity. Just, I'm curious what you've experienced in your life that kind of made you go, hey, there is more to this world than what we're told. I would really love to hear.
That's I appreciate the opportunity to share, and it's always something I think is a great way to see how this is meaningful in some way to me. And I think Tui, you're really knowledgeable in a lot of different areas, and so I'm glad to be able to share this, because it's something that not a lot of people probably know, at least if they're familiar with some of the work I've done, because it's not something I share a whole lot about. But there's an experience that I had in 2013 where I had an opportunity to participate in a ceremonial, basically a medicine ceremony, and I'll share some about that. But before I really kind of get into the core of how that was significant, I had mentioned before, I've had plenty of synchronicities. I think that's been like a really prominent thing throughout my life. But there are a few things here and there that I think are interesting or that stand out. But I would just, to kind of put it together in a nutshell, I would say that some of the things that stand out that I would like to include probably the most are, a lot of people, like I said, they've seen something like a giant UFO, or maybe just something in the sky, things like that. I don't really attest to anything of that nature particularly, but I have seen things like, I have seen the Marfa lights, for instance, on a few occasions. And this is a mysterious phenomenon that is still unexplained today after over a century. So I think that using that as a reference, not just for itself literally, but also as sort of an analogy to some of the other things that I think are important, it gives us an idea that there are still things that are not explained that we might be challenged with to understand, or that might give us some kind of insight. And it could be a natural phenomenon, it could be terrestrial, or it could be something that is a higher form or law of nature that we may not really be aware of. And I think that it's interesting to see some of the possibilities for these things that are occurring in many ways on maybe one occasion for people, whereas you go to see the Marfa lights and they're there all the time. This is a recurring phenomena that I think is important to examine in a way that might give us an understanding about some of this other anomalous light phenomena. So that's really important, because I think that things like that can help us understand. I personally have seen those lights, and they are very strange. It is not something I think that can be deduced or reduced down to car lights or reflections of cars and reflections of car lights and headlights and things like that.
Yeah, they predate cars too, don't they? I mean, there's Indians, way back seeing them. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something that, it does make sense in some ways. That at least a portion of the lights seen would end up being car lights later on, because of there being a highway there. And you can get into all of those things, but I use that as an example because it's important to see, even though that it's not the most, some people, it's completely mind-blowing, and some people are still in sort of a state of disillusionment when they're there looking at them, thinking that, that's not real. And I've seen that happen with people there at the viewing station. It's interesting, but to me, that stands out. And then, I'd like to also mention about how during a ceremonial trip I had out to the deserts of near the Big Bend and in West Texas, I was able to participate in a medicine ceremony down there in Journey, where we went boating down the Rio Grande, and we went hiking up Emery Peak, and we finished off the ceremony with a meditation with ayahuasca, which is a very powerful shamanic medicine from the Amazon and Peruvian culture. And I think that's really important to see, that this is something that not only impacted me in many ways, but that I have a respect for. I think that it's important because it has a connotation that might not really be very well understood, and how the common, I guess, social outlook views things like drug use and how something like this may be obscured based upon lack of understanding. So ayahuasca is essentially a brew made by Amazonian groups that used it shamanically through some kind of ritual or ceremony to help heal people. And basically you include various plant material, very specific plant material, and it interacts chemically as a psychoactive substance, which enables basically inducing dimethyltryptamine into your system, which is DMT. And mostly it's likely we're already naturally producing this. And it's important to also make that distinction that we do this naturally, but I think introducing it into your system is something that simply activates a lot of the factories that produce those chemical compounds already. And so a lot of different forms of meditation do this. This is something we got to experience there in the desert with a clear sky and no clouds, completely expansive view of the galactic arm. It was the most immersive, profound experience I'd probably say I've had in my whole life. And just interacting with the things in which I did, the forms in which I did through my experience, which really was sort of this out-of-body experience. It was really incredible. And there was a lot of things that I would say opened me in many ways to connecting with greater aspects of our reality that I think are important for us to understand, because when we come back to this normal channel, again, in our own mythos in which we perceive the world, we have to filter things through this medium, which might not really be always something we can see that is accessible through everything else that at least I feel is naturally all around us at all times. Many of these different things, these strange forms, or maybe some kind of paraphysical, transphysical phenomena, things that really are genuinely unexplained that occur, but that interact with the physical realm, could be somehow comprised of different parts of this spectrum that we exist within, whether we say it's dimensional or whatever form of reality. I think it's important to show that we may only be able to perceive physically a few things that are here, whereas there could be an enormous scope of this reality vastly beyond our physical perception. And I think not only having done this type of ceremony, does this allow us to also open up to what's really here around us, but at least when we come back to this normal state, we carry that understanding with us, despite not always being able to actively view it per se. And I think that was the greatest takeaway I had through that, was that the relationship we have to the rest of the natural world and intelligence or consciousness, to me, is a really important part to a lot of this phenomena. And I think that the greater understanding that an advanced entity or civilization might possess is that we are connected through that medium or that continuum of this reality that we exist in. Whether we want to say that collectively is a form of mythos, I think that's important to consider, that the way we understand, the way we would even be able to interpret in our limited scope of perception what an advanced intelligence or consciousness would be, has to be through filtering down into our scope of reality. And to behold it might only be a mere fraction of its existence. And I think it's important to see that when we have these anomalous experiences, that's more than likely, unless it is explainable and we can deduce it to something that does abide by various laws of nature that we at least know about, I think it's important to show that maybe the small fraction of things that are actually going on that aren't explainable might be due to advanced forms of these natural laws or forms of mechanical engineering, whatever it is that is allowing this to happen, are beyond our current comprehension, and that could be alluding to much more that we don't get to always experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you think about how insects can see a much broader range of light than we can. And we are limited by our own biological mechanism. And then when you do go through some certain ceremonies, like you did with the ayahuasca, it's like it expands you. And for that period of time, you are able to take in more, but then you do return to your day-to-day life. And so how do you then go forward with that? I think it does make you just notice, I think even without being enhanced, there's so many interesting things that we just tend to miss. I think there's so many things that our attention, we don't even see. We don't even see these things. These that could be, big, important observations that just we could walk right by.
Yeah, I think it's probably something that helps us understand a lot about these things that people experience that are part of a realm that is not seeming to be physical, but is interacting to them through some physical medium. And I think that a lot of parapsychological abilities could be attributed to this, or various things relating to supernatural or paranormal experiences, whether if people are having interactions with disembodied entities or some form of intelligence or consciousness that has the ability to communicate to us through a physical medium, and whatever that medium is, there's a science to that, and I think that's really interesting. That can help us get a better idea about how that works. But until then, that would probably be a big question mark, and I think it is for a lot of people right now. Because when you have that happen, some people, they're more natural about it and they feel like, it's an ongoing thing throughout their life. I think it's important to see that at some point, I feel confident that if we continue to develop scientifically, we will find some real and profound answers to a lot of these curious things that challenge science and might help us understand reality a little bit better.
Well, I envy you that you've seen the Marfa lights. That has been really high on my Texas to-do list. In fact, my brother, who's a retired Air Force colonel, actually, one time when he was working at Edwards Air Force Base, I asked him, if you were not in the Air Force, what would you be, and he was a test pilot, what would you be doing with your life? And he said, and I was a little kid when he said this, he goes, I would be studying anomalous experiences in places such as the Marfa lights. And so it's been kind of on my list ever since then. And that was actually the first time I'd heard the word. Yeah, it was the first time I'd heard the word anomalous too. So he sent me to the dictionary with that one, and Marfa lights has been high on my list ever since.
That's a great memory. That's awesome. Well, listen, guys, we have to. I hate to break because y'all are. It's wonderful conversation, but we have to take a break for a moment, and we will be right back. Everybody, stay with us, and we'll be right back with Daniel Jones.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back, everyone, to Soul. This is your host, Teal Gray. We're coming to you live on WBHM-DB Radio out of Birmingham, Alabama. Now, Daniel, we were talking just before the break, you've been leading us through a really interesting path, but I wanted to touch on, and you were kind of heading this direction, to talk specifically a little bit more about non-human intelligence, if we could touch on that.
Yeah, I think it's an important part to what may play a vital role in a lot of this. And of course, the simplest way I think to look at non-human intelligence is just to see what we understand about animal intelligence, which of course we are, as human beings, as Homo sapiens, we are animals as well. But I think that, let's just say, non-human doesn't necessarily just mean animals, but it's going to be something that it isn't necessarily limited to our capacity of intelligence. So there are really important things we can learn about animal intelligence, and something just happened recently that shows us that, you know, there are cognitive advantages in some creatures and certain species that maybe others don't have. And I think it's one of the things that you could look at through forms of biology and how different forms of life altogether might have whatever modes of interaction they have with their environment could lead them to developing various abilities and cognitive functions that we can see people can possess. And we actually have things happening like that now, which came out more recently. There's actually a case where a cephalopod, which is like an octopus, passed a cognitive test that is for children. And I think that this shows that a lot of creatures, non-human creatures, bear a very similar understanding for their environment. And so, you know, it might not just be how smart they are, but their ability to thrive in their environment, to be adaptive and innovative. And I think if we were to conceptualize any form of an extraterrestrial biological entity or an EBE, that this is going to be something we have to consider, is how would such an entity function? And if there are advanced entities or advanced agents that have the ability to traverse the stars and come all the way to Earth, then you would probably have a incredible degree of engineering or physiology or technology or whatever existence that you are in at that point. Probably allows you to understand a lot of information and a lot more than maybe some biological species or creatures have the ability to perceive. And so through augmentation and through directed evolution, we're doing things like that today with bionic body parts and different extensions to our own senses that allow us to perceive things beyond visible perception, like infrared or different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that weren't accessible to us before. And so being able to do this gives us a greater scope of this spectrum we exist within. If a form of advanced non-human intelligence is interacting with us, we may only be able to perceive a degree of its existence, whereas it may be able to perceive a far greater spectrum. It may be like, I might liken it to being a musician, being able to hear all the notes on a piano. We can hear all 88, but if there was a piano without boundaries on either end, it could keep going forever. And we might not be able to hear certain notes past the higher or lower registers. Some animals might, but the whole idea is that it continues. And through that medium of sound and vibration and all of those things which we exist within at some level, an advanced form of intelligence might be able to exist through a completely different part of that spectrum, which we don't have an awareness of. And it might not have an awareness of us. And if it does, it may us differently than we would it. And I think that's an important part to our role in this whole medium of this reality, is that we can see different animals and creatures. An important part to this is that there was a movie that depicted this kind of in an interesting way. There's in more recent years, there was a movie called Prometheus that came a prequel to the Alien franchise by Ridley Scott, and it's an interesting movie. But one of the concepts they portray is that a very wealthy man and very successful business person and industrialist was able to capitalize on his business well enough to make really successful things happen. The role of artificial intelligence, and so one of the characters who is old at the end, they find what they refer to as the engineers, and the engineers are basically these creatures or beings that are from another place, like another planet, but they went to Earth and they created humanity. And it's a very similar story to what we hear in different religious and mythological traditions. It's just portrayed in this movie. And the old man created a robot, looked very similar to a person. And so he attempted to communicate with this being by saying, tell him that we're here, that basically like how they created us and I created you, that we're the same. We're both creators. And so this is kind of his character's look at how he understood their creators as this literal form of someone there who made basically humans all together, and then how with modern technology and sort of futuristic understandings of science, they made a futuristic form of like an android or a robot that looks exactly like a person. And so he thought he created life because of the point of bringing that up. Is an interesting movie, but the whole point is when we see how our progeny, which will be something similar to AI and at advanced capacities, it will be something that will help us traverse a lot of mysterious streams of information that are challenging us scientifically. And I think that through advanced AI, we've seen a lot of things happen. We've seen the decoding of ancient languages. We've seen various geometric forms that are recognizable by various algorithms that can be something we use to detect architecture and archaeological sites out somewhere, either in our world or in other worlds. And so that's a really interesting concept to think of how something like archaeology could be done on other planets. And we can use the term xeno or exo, as in outside, or xeno is foreign, to say xenoarchaeology or exoarchaeology, or some might even say astro, as in, in the stars, astroarchaeology. So thinking about how things like AI can help us has been a real science and various engineering groups in a real serious way, and seeing what we can use to help us understand some of these really challenging things that maybe right now we think, for whatever reason, in physical Western science and medicine, that our brains can't comprehend. I think that it's an important part to play in our growth.
Is AI? Are you most excited about advancements in AI, or what aspects of technology and the things new technology that you see? Like, what has you excited for the future? What aspects of new technology are you excited about?
I think that we have a really big contrast in high tech and low tech, and it's really unfortunate because you have things like rover on Mars and all of these deep space exploration things, and really engineering, right? But then you have poverty and really hunger stricken societies in the world that are really impoverished and in need of assistance and help.
Good point.
And I think that it's important to not continue that stratification. I would be excited for, a lot of people are really afraid of the singularity, which is
Yeah.
when humanity and AI merges. And I think that and I don't want to, this is the thing. I think that people it's a bad rap, and I'm not necessarily rooting for it myself, but I'm not naive to the practicality that technology is leading us in a really beneficial way with medicine, medicinal sciences and engineering. I think that it's important to see that we've come a long way and really good things, and that there's still a lot of great stuff to come. So I would be excited to see, to the point if AI is industrialized on a more massive scale, and automation is something that becomes something of the norm, that we have smart robots that can help clean up our world and the mess that we've made, and to go out and identify
Yeah.
areas that have waste or chemicals or nuclear fallout. All of
Fukushima.
these things that we've done, I think, are really something that AI could help us with. But, it's also a really dangerous subject. And I think a lot of people think like Elon Musk is trying to destroy the world and do really, really crazy things. I think it's, it's commendable. It's very daring. It's very risky. And he knows that
Yeah.
AI is a really incredibly challenging thing to try to work with. And I think that it's important to see how we can do better using new technology, maybe using natural technology the best we can, and using synthetic technology, to the best of our ability. And the other thing is that it's important to differentiate some things, because I think the human form has a lot of potential. And I think that spiritual traditions, wisdom traditions have talked about this a lot, that we have the capacity for really amazing things. And I don't deny that there is something, I think, about that really lingers in the back of humanity that's sort of been dormant, and that maybe we haven't necessarily been able to tap into that. Maybe it's been disabled from us, from some form of, a form that would be able to have that kind of ability. And I think that whether it's us, if we've done it to ourselves, or just, through circumstance, or if that's been directed, it's important to see that maybe we can start to utilize more of our organic understanding of nature and of reality, rather than having to rely so much on a synthetic one, because that's also a big challenge with certain ideas of what civilization can do. If it doesn't pass this great barrier, then it might not ever continue on into it in whatever state. It might just perish and die away. So we have to be careful about how we utilize new technology, and I think it's something that will be different in many years, but it can help us, archaeologically, through communications, through our own understanding of important aspects of reality, laws of nature, hidden aspects, hidden forms of information that are present to us even now, but we might not really even be able to have access to until some form of engineering allows us that. And I think that through a lot of great things happening right now, we're on our way to finding out some of those questions about our reality. And a lot of people don't want that to be demystified, because it, once the mystery of something isn't there, it doesn't seem as intriguing, I think, to a lot of people, because it can remain ambiguous. But I think science is all about understanding whatever it is, whether it's mundane or exotic, or has some kind of significance in how things function. Because when you look at a lot of patterns in geometry and numerical sequences that tie into important parts of how the material universe even comes into being, I think there's something there that should show us that there's more to this medium, this reality, this mythos that we're in, that we understand. And maybe through interacting with an advanced agent or an advanced form of non-human intelligence, either through our own organic means or using an interface with like an advanced form of AI that we can establish peacefully, I think there's a lot we can learn. And when we establish that medium and that interface with an advanced agents, I think that's going to change how we understand our world altogether. And it's going to be challenging to a lot of different viewpoints and worldviews, but it's something I think that could be for the better. And it's something we have to see really, and if we'll even attain that opportunity. if that'll even ever present itself to us.
Wow, I love that. Well, I can't even believe that our time has run out yet again, because we could just ask more questions. But Daniel, thank you so much for joining us for this part 2. And is there anything before we go that you would like to touch on or share? And also, how can everybody stay in touch with you?
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm hoping to get some major headway with publishing done here soon, so I can get Mythos out for anyone interested. You can just stay in touch with me through social media. Definitely feel free to check out The Vortex on YouTube, and I'm on Instagram as well. You can send me an email if you'd like to get in touch. And if anyone has any questions about some of these experiences, sightings, or investigations that I've done, or whatever it is, glad to chat with them as well. It's always great to talk with you guys. I think that we could always get together and have some good discussions, but I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and talk a little bit about the work that I've done and my own experience and perception of some of these things. And that's kind of what a lot of the basis of my book Mythos is about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Tui, thank you for being co-host with me tonight. And how can everybody find you?
Oh, me? Well, hey, you can just go by my website, tuisnider.com, and or drop by YouTube. I'm doing a lot there these days as well. And of course, you can find my books on Amazon. So hit me up. I love to hear from people. And
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, listen, I love it. You guys are old buddies of mine, and so I love when we can do this. And maybe we can do it, every so often. I'd love for us to get together, because there's always so much going on. Everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. Daniel has been an amazing guest yet again. Tui is an amazing co-host, and you guys are a great audience. You're wonderful. I get messages from you all over the world, so we appreciate you listening on whatever time zone you're on. So keep listening, and we'll be back next Friday. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.